Hello, and welcome to the Leaders in Cleantech podcast. I'm David Hunt, CEO and founder of Hyperion Executive Search and your host for today. Welcome back for another episode. Today, delighted to have another guest in the studio. My guest is Hannah Scott, who is the CEO of Oxfordshire Greentech and also the co-founder and CEO of the climate tech Supercluster. So delighted to hear much more about that, Hannah. Firstly, welcome to Liverpool. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Good. So you, like I, share a big passion for moving the dial forward on the clean tech agenda, right? So, and you've been doing that for some time. So it'd be good just to get a bit of a flavour as to where and how that passion was manifest and how you first got into doing what you're doing now.
So I've actually been on quite a journey in terms of my career and how I got into this stuff, because right now I do a lot to support climate tech organisations and to support the sustainability agenda more widely in Oxfordshire. But I used to do music. My sort of first degree was as a music undergrad. And after that, I sort of started reading more about climate crisis narratives and just seeing how bad the problem was. And I took a year out just to kind of reassess my life a little bit and think to myself, I love music, but do I love it enough to dedicate my life to it? And I thought, no. And then I thought, okay, climate crisis, I want to do something about that, but can I do that with a music degree? Also, no. Or at least not to the level that I wanted to. You know, obviously there's lots of opportunities to volunteer out there, but I was like, no, I want to make a strategic difference. And so that led to me then going to Sussex Uni and doing a master's there and kind of totally pivoting, reorienting my life a little bit. And then after that, going to work for a sustainability consultancy and charity called Bioregional, and did that for 4.5 years. And as part of my work with that consultancy, we set up this low carbon business network called Oxfordshire Greentech. Right. And that was just one of many projects that I was kind of juggling at the time. And eventually I was sort of managing that as its network manager whilst also doing project work elsewhere. And I just thought to myself, you know, this thing could really fly if it had a full-time person working on it. But at the moment, I'm not giving it that effort and energy that it needs. So, you know, time to reorient my life again and sort of take a risk and essentially became CEO of Oxfordshire Greentech in April of this year.
Right. Okay. So again, quite a journey. It's interesting actually how many people come from like humanities degrees, because we always think that everybody in climate tech has to be a PhD or, you know, even like a master's in some form of engineering topic. Right. And many of our guests, of course, are, but so many are also from the humanities or other areas. I think you might be the first from music, but recently Jojo, I know, was an English lit student who's then sort of transformed herself. So tell us a bit then, because the ecosystem is one thing that fascinates me in terms of clean tech, because it's the thing that I love, and I think where so much positivity comes from these ecosystems that we curate, where you make the connections that drive things forwards. Tell us a little bit about the Oxfordshire Greentech sort of cluster or the work there particularly. So how did you talk about it sort of evolved out of some of your consultancy work, but what does what's the core activities that you're doing now, and what kind of size and shape of organization is it?
Yeah, so a real range, and precisely because of what you've just described it as, which is an ecosystem. And, you know, as in nature, that has a lot of diversity to it, as in the business space as well, that is the case. And so for the Oxfordshire ecosystem, we have the strength of two powerful universities that are world leaders and cutting edge in the sort of research and innovation they're generating. Oxford University creates the most spin-outs out of any UK university. So a lot of the innovation in the climate tech space is sort of coming through there as sort of like a very early stage approach. And then you have obviously the science and business parks around the county as well. Those tend to be a little bit outside of Oxfordshire with the room to sort of breathe and grow and expand what they're doing. We have a lot of professional services in our network as well, those who can provide accountancy services, legal services, all the stuff that innovators need to grow and scale and to understand the sort of legal and political implications of what's going to happen as they accelerate what they're doing. And we have a lot of what I'd call sort of traditional businesses as well, those who are trying to become more sustainable and are reorienting their business practices. Yeah. That's a little bit outside of the climate tech innovation space. But I think that they're all very interlinked in some ways, because we need that sort of early stage innovation, that sort of technology that's going to fill the gaps that we currently have, but we also need to use existing technology, existing policy, existing sort of behavioral change models to essentially get us that systemic transformation that we're looking for.
Yeah. The old adage of start from where you are, right? So you have to utilize what already exists. So tell me a little bit about, because obviously worldwide, everybody will know of Oxford and Oxford University, and I should say it's well known for spinning out many businesses. But we were touching on this before, just in terms of, certainly in the UK, of how smooth a journey or how difficult it is to spin out an idea or an innovation to suddenly become a startup is one thing, but then the scale up is really the sort of next stage, and where there's often a gap. So how are you helping to, I guess, fill that gap a little bit, taking this innovation, taking these early stage startups through to a point where then commercializing and hopefully internationally expanding?
Sure. Well, a lot of what we do is about connection and convening. So we have a monthly newsletter. We have a quarterly grant funding alert that goes out to our members, which basically does a summary of all of the UK grant funding opportunities for innovators. And we also have partnered with our sister network, Cambridge Cleantech, for the past 4 and a bit years on something called Cleantech Venture Day, which is one of the UK's biggest cleantech pitching days, essentially. It's like a better version of Dragon's Den, I'd say, because it's focused on climate positive technologies. And those are spaces where, startups who are looking to scale, they can pitch to a room of, maybe 200 investors, funders, other innovators, corporates, looking for that kind of transformative funding that's going to take their product or service to the next level. And so we've helped convene that for the past few years. And I think over the course of Cleantech Venture Day's lifetime, which has been, I think, just a little over a decade, I think there's been about $650 million worth of investment that's gone into cleantech, which is really powerful. And I think we can do more of that. And then I guess the final thing is, I run a business network. It's all about relationships. It's all about, creating those opportunities for people to meet each other, maybe in spaces that they, or with opportunities that they wouldn't normally get if they were just operating in isolation. So it's putting on those networking events. It's putting on events around specific low carbon topics, for example, bringing in experts to speak to those topics and share some of the cutting edge technology that's happening in the industry, and then getting people, like-minded individuals in the same room to connect and maybe find collaborative opportunities together.
Yeah. There's a lot in that, and we touched on this before about sort of the incubators and the accelerators that exist often with short-term programs or with a period of support. But you, I guess it's more of a consistent, ongoing network that you have set up and actually coordinating with the team in Cambridge as well. So. Because that's one of the challenges. And if you are a really a boffin, for better words, who comes out of Oxford, Cambridge with a fantastic idea, a fantastic technology, but then you've got to enter this world of commercialization and obviously fundraising and all these other things that are really alien if your entire academic career has been based around some form of technology and or solution that you've suddenly realized. So how do you first engage with some of those innovators, and what are the first steps that if someone is an innovator looking to approach organizations like yours, that they can really start to move beyond this intellectual idea to a practical idea?
I think there's definitely a lot happening there, again, in the university space with sort of tech transfer offices. Oxford University Innovation, for example, does a lot to sort of help those ideas that, do come from a very technical perspective. Obviously big brains behind the idea, but not necessarily the commercial savvy to bring that to market. And I know that they do a lot to facilitate that. We are not as early stage as that. We're sort of looking to engage those companies once they have commercialized. Maybe have done a few pilot projects, have an MVP at the very least, and are looking then to sort of attract their sort of first customers, so to speak. And I guess we can do that a lot with the advocacy work that we do. So we use our social media, we use our website and other platforms to really shout about these new innovations that are coming out, because we believe in the power of telling positive stories and drawing attention to the kinds of innovation that are going to help us. So it's a little bit about that. But also, I mentioned before, we have a lot of professional services companies in our network. I forgot to mention the ones that are focused on marketing and branding and building teams and commercializing in that regard. And there are several now, and many more are joining in Oxfordshire, who are now looking to sort of pivot the portfolio of companies that they work with. There are those who are now thinking, I'm only going to support climate tech businesses, or I'm only going to support green companies because I want those ones to succeed. And those ones are often the ones that need a little bit of a helping hand, especially if they're very early stage, because they don't necessarily have the capital or the talent or in-house marketing savvy. And so sometimes they need that little bit of a hand. And what I really love about the Greentech network is that people are often very willing to offer sort of pro bono support in the first instance. Lots of our professional services companies offer, for example, first hour free to other members in the network as a way of encouraging that sort of green tech trade, if you like. So that's a real way that it helps out.
How do we move beyond it's a business network, which is all about connection and collaboration. And it clearly makes sense to utilize Oxford and Cambridge, two of the best known universities in the world with great reputations. But the problems that we're and there and you're solving are global. And obviously the access to funds and opportunities are global. So how do you engage with, I guess, the world outside of that cluster or that triangle of hotbeds of innovation?
Yeah, and it is a great question because there's been so much focus on the golden triangle of Oxford, Cambridge, London for the past few years, and for good reason. There's a lot happening there, and depending on sort of your macroeconomic take or perspective, by encouraging those regions to sort of draw out their innovation and share that with the rest of the world, then the rest of us can benefit. But obviously there are lots of areas that are doing similarly great things elsewhere in Europe. And that's one of the reasons why I'm a co-founder of the Climate Tech Supercluster, which is this region that goes far beyond Oxfordshire or far beyond Cambridge. And it seeks to link up the UK, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France, anywhere basically within a 4-hour approximate journey, train journey of London. And there's sort of academic backing behind that rationale. And there was a report that Deal Room did, which basically showed that there is this hotbed of climate innovation within this area. And so we're now looking to engage more fully in that wider ecosystem, just because we know that there are, there's greater investment to be had at that scale. There's more that can be done to work through these sort of knotty systemic problems when you look at them at scale again, rather than just thinking, oh, we can't do this in this location, but maybe we could do something if we connected up corporates, investors, innovators across a much larger geographic region and sort of convened, the sort of roundtables or pitching events or other events, basically, where you're getting the brightest minds in this area together and getting them to collaborate in a way that is truly beneficial for all parties.
Yeah. We touched on this before about the fact that obviously Oxford is statistically one of the biggest spin-outs or universities for spin-outs, and that there are clusters and ecosystems as we talked before about sort of in the Netherlands and in France and in Germany and Berlin and other places. It's just trying to get to grips with the connections there, because there's so much good that happens in the UK from an innovation point of view. There's so much money from London perspective, and yet we seem to struggle a little bit. We touched on this before about having real scale-up companies like perhaps some other European countries. Do you have any particular view on how or why that might be? Is that a misconception, or is there something way that we should and need to connect the dots a little more to really accelerate these UK businesses?
I think it is probably fair to say that in some regards, we are lagging behind Europe. I think in other regards, I mentioned earlier, we are second behind the US in terms of number of clean tech companies, which is really promising. But then I guess when you dive into the detail and you look at them, what stage are they at, what level of maturity, that's maybe when we start getting into problems. And I think especially in cities like Oxford, Cambridge and London, the cost of living in those areas and working in those areas is quite high.
Yeah.
And I think especially for companies that are growing, they're looking to attract new talent, young minds, young individuals who are keen to get stuck into something dynamic and rapidly growing. It's often quite difficult for those young people to live in those kind of areas because of the housing prices, essentially. So it's the human side of scaling, that's a difficulty. Yeah. And I think we are seeing an uptick in climate tech investment, which is really encouraging. I think last year it maybe took a little bit of a fall after 2021, but still overall fairly strong, which is very encouraging. But I think, again, in the investment community, there is maybe a slight tendency towards investment in SaaS sort of companies rather than, or maybe more than in deep tech and hardware-based companies. And ultimately, we need a combination of both. Software can enhance hardware's capabilities, and hardware is sort of necessarily to get like physical level change as we live on a physical planet. So I think there maybe needs to be a little bit of reorientation in the investment portfolio perspective as well, and just thinking about, okay, these deep tech companies that are creating products and services that might not see as short a return on investment are nevertheless extremely crucial for the fight against climate change. And it might just take a little bit of a reorientation, essentially, in some investors' mindsets to think about how they can best invest in those kind of spaces.
Yeah, I guess, again, it's a little bit anecdotal, but I certainly feel that some of the European impact investors do have a slightly longer term view on some of these things coming to fruition. Some, of course, still are focused very much on the SaaS models, as you say, but I think increasingly there's an understanding of this, one, you have to have both to really move the dial forward. With the cluster, you talked about moving into sort of all connections with the Netherlands and France and then sort of northern parts of Europe. Is that likewise with universities, or what does the ecosystem look like there?
Yeah, I think it's going to have to include universities. I think they are sort of powerhouses of innovation, and there are many excellent universities in this region. We've been engaging with the University of Twente, for example, if that's how it's pronounced.
I think so. Yeah,
okay, great. And obviously, we already have deep roots into Oxford and Cambridge universities, also Cranfield University, which is across the Arc region. Although we shouldn't call it the Arc anymore for political reasons. But exactly, there's lots of sort of university engagement. University of Paris, for example, in the Paris-Saclay region. So they're a crucial part of it because they often are where that really early stage cutting edge technology comes from. Not always, but often, it's those research groups that have been working on an issue for several years and then are able to bring it sort of a commercial offering to light as a result of that research, which is really impactful. And actually, one research group can form several different organizations. I know that that's been the case with a particular research organization at the University of Oxford, which has managed to spin off something to do with sort of sustainable aviation fuel, also green ammonia, also a product that sort of breaks down plastic using, I don't know whether it's pyrolysis. I'm showing my lack of science background here, but it just goes to show that, universities can be the cause of many different green tech companies. Yeah.
I still feel that, as you said, because of the level of innovation and intellect in these places, the trouble is about, as we talked about before, about execution, of moving beyond the idea into an actual company and then leverage. So again, talk to us about a little bit some of the work that you do to help founders who maybe have a more technical bias or bent to understand the world of getting some traction, so fundraising and presenting themselves. We touched on this before about sort of how you tell the message or how you tell the story in a coherent way, but in a necessary way and not an overly technical way. So are there particular sort of, themes that your companies seek or are struggling for that they come to you for assistance with?
Yeah, a lot of it is around grant funding. Although that is sort of I wouldn't say a poison chalice, but maybe a double-edged sword is possibly the word. Just because I know of lots of companies who, when we were still in the European Union, were applying for European funding and found a lot of that quite bureaucratic and time-consuming. And similarly, I think sometimes that's the case with other grants that people apply for within the UK. And obviously as a small founder, there's only so much time that you have in a day. And we were discussing earlier, you're sort of running a business that takes, a full day's work anyway, on, regardless or in spite of all the, not regardless, but you know what I mean in terms of there's still everything so much else to do. But yeah, when we do that, we do have sort of grant funding experts in our network, who we'll run webinars with, for example, very sort of quick, snappy things that people can come along to, maybe on a lunch break, although not really a break if you're doing more work, but that's the founder's lifestyle, I think, and getting that expertise from sort of our sort of network, trusted experts who can give that advice for free. And so that's something that we do. We have special interest groups as well. Those tend to focus more around low carbon topics and themes rather than sort of business related themes. But nevertheless, I guess if you're in the low carbon transport space, you might be facing certain issues that peers in the sort of digital space won't be struggling as much with. So it would be good to have that peer-to-peer support from that particular group. And I think I've mentioned before, the newsletter is also a great opportunity for people to mention what they do and how they can support green tech innovators there too.
Yeah. So let's look a bit, Hannah, about your personal experience, having come from, firstly, the academic background on music, and then obviously upskilling, so to speak, in this direction at Sussex. But then you're working for an organisation and throwing yourself into a CEO shoes, so that brings with it a lot of responsibilities. What have been the biggest challenges and biggest rewards for you personally during that period of time?
This is where I have to be like, right, how much can I divulge on a podcast that's going to be publicly listened to? I think biggest challenge for me so far has possibly been going from being in an organization of about 30, where, you had a head of finance, a head of HR, head of comms, all the rest of it. Yeah. You had those people who had those specialisms and those expertise areas, to sort of being the person that all of that relies on you. It does make me laugh a little bit every now and then when someone will join the network and they'll say, "Oh, who should I ask about, including stuff in the newsletter?" I'm like, "It's me." Like, "Who should I talk to about invoicing?" I'm like, "Also me." And I guess there is, to a certain extent, maybe a little bit of reputational. If it doesn't feel as good to be like, oh, it's not just me, it's me and volunteers, but it is mostly me doing the coordination and feeling, maybe it would be nicer if I had a head of something or other to refer people onto. And in time, we will. Yeah. But I guess in the short term, as we're still growing and I'm still, the first person to be a full-time employee of this network, then that's to come. But I think that we've had a lot of successes as well. I guess, being able to speak to you on this podcast is one of them, but being able to engage with local authorities on sort of big, substantial funding bids, and to see those come to fruition. We've been starting to have conversations around green skills for Oxfordshire as well, and just trying to really drive the agenda on that. So we've been engaging with the local enterprise partnership there, and with some of the sort of higher education or sort of extended education organisations to think about what does Oxfordshire need in terms of skills for the future. Yeah. And that does feed directly into our climate tech organizations as well, and like the kind of talent that they're looking to attract in the future. How can we support young people who are thinking about a career to choose skills that are going to be very applicable to a future world where it needs to be net zero? So that's been exciting, and we've done a bunch of events. I think last year we did 23 events or something of differing sizes. Yeah. But obviously one of them being Cleantech Venture Day times 2, because we now do it twice a year. Yeah. And that's a very large and impactful kind of event, which I do love to take part in. And hopefully we've got one coming up next year, which I'm theming it on sort of everything, everywhere, all at once. Right. Just because I love that quote from Antonio Guterres. And I think it it sort of plays very much into my theory of change, which is that we can't wait for government alone to get the job done. We can't wait for business alone to get the job done. We can't wait for individual citizens to change their behaviors and get the job done. Fundamentally, we need all of us doing stuff all at once. And the part that I can play in that is sort of giving a showcase to the businesses that are doing that and encouraging them into a space where other people can buy from them, and give them the visibility that they deserve, essentially.
Yeah. Well, there's quite a lot there, I should say. Certainly on the personal side, I think it's really helpful being the sort of the CEO of one, as most founders are. And I started, it was just me and a laptop, so it is exactly that. But when you're engaging with startups, to actually have some genuine empathy that's what they're going through. And as we said before, it's very tempting to think, well, why don't you take this course on such and such, or learn these things, or spend some time doing that, when you're juggling 20 plates. It's just not impossible. So it's good that you've experienced some of that, but also you're supporting companies and founders who are going through that realization that startup world isn't all about beanbags and Elon Musk, right? It's a little bit,
if only.
It's a little bit different. Let's talk about, because there's two things. There's one of which, of course, is the capturing the innovation within the organizations or within the clusters that you're talking about, which is fundamentally important, giving someone or companies somewhere to go to get advice, to get support, to get mentorship, to get interaction with peer-to-peers. And then there's the other conversation that we had about sort of reaching outside of the bubble to existing companies, to existing technology, to existing talents, from our perspective, where you're showcasing there are these opportunities here, and you're trying to bring people along the journey. So it's a struggle when you've got to really look insular, because that's, again, where you've been paid for, what you were created for, to look after this hub. But at the same time, as you said, to move the dial forward, we need to be engaging outside of this bubble. So how do you sort of face those challenges?
Yes. So I guess, like, when you were speaking, all that was coming to, not all that, but a lot that was coming to mind was around the sort of large corporate entities who are being pushed by policy to set their own sort of net zero targets. Some of them are setting quite ambitious ones, given the sort of scale and size of their organization. And essentially, they'll probably need innovation in order to reach those targets. And for example, organizations like Sainsbury's now have a Sainsbury's Innovation Fund, with their sort of core thesis being that in order for them to reach their ambitious net zero target, they will need to use technologies that don't yet exist. And so their fund exists to encourage, to sort of bring out that sort of creativity probably from universities or from science parks, like places of great research and innovation, and to come up with the kinds of ideas that are going to be genuinely, systems changing. And for us, it's we can do a lot of that kind of interactivity through the sort of larger events that we put on, where we are, showing these pitching organizations, but we also convene a lot of roundtables around potential, one-off issues. Or not one-off issues, but specific issues. We convened one around campus scale. What was it? Sorry. Energy systems for campus decarbonisation, I think was the grand the grand title. And we brought a range of organisations together on that. Definitely sort of at corporate level, also universities, also innovators, all sorts. And that kind of interfacing can really help corporates see what kind of technology is out there. And then to get even more specific, we do also help with sort of technology scouting as well. That's something that we offer. And with our sort of united networks of Oxfordshire Greentech, Cambridge Cleantech, the sort of networks that we have in London, and now this wider sort of climate tech supercluster network, we're able, when we engage with corporates, to have that really broad reach across this ecosystem to see what innovation is out there and help pair that up with the corporates that need it. So that's one way that we reach outside the bubble, and that's a really good one for being sort of beneficial for all parties, essentially. Not saying that the rest of our work isn't, but some of it is. Some of it has a larger ticket item, you could say, attached to it, and can make a real difference. And then, I guess we have had sort of engagement with central government on some of our events as well, where, I mean, for example, we were a co-author on the University of Oxford's Pathways to a Zero Carbon Oxfordshire report, quite a seminal report that basically spelled out the different scenarios that Oxfordshire as a whole will need to look at to get to net zero. And we had the then UK business champion for net zero, Andrew Griffiths, I can't remember which one it is now, but he basically came and keynoted that. And that was quite important because it just showed that sort of outside of just Oxfordshire impact that we were having. And there's lots of other ways that we're connecting outside of ourselves. You know, by joining up with our sister network with this sort of like Oxford-Cambridge narrative, especially since there is that sort of Oxford to Cambridge sort of powerful region, we are able to sort of reach outside ourselves a bit more and say, you know, hey, look at what's happening here. You know, what can be done elsewhere? How can other people have their own sort of climate tech clusters elsewhere, so that, you know, we all win together. Yeah,
well, that's an interesting part, because again, the brand name of Oxford and Cambridge is clearly extremely strong, and everybody knows that London is where an awful lot of the global money is still. So there's big draws there, but it can be challenging if you're Sheffield or Liverpool or Manchester or other, you know, brilliant universities. And I'm sure they're doing lots of great work with, knowledge partnerships. But how can they leverage, and given the fact that you are a small organisation with a million things to do, how can they perhaps learn from, engage with, or share some of your learnings over the last years to enhance and make sure that people in those regions equally have an opportunity to innovate, but to access some of the knowledge and learnings and contacts and networks that you've created?
I think that's a really interesting one. And I think at the moment we're engaging quite strongly with the UK Science Park Association, of which there will be parks, you know, all over the UK. And that actually we're engaging kind of around heat networks with that at the moment. So something quite specific. But, you know, there's the heat network feasibility funding that the government provides. And we're exploring that with a few heat science parks within Oxfordshire at the moment. And then hoping that, you know, if that feasibility study goes ahead, we can use that information to sort of speak to the rest of the sort of Science Park Association and say, hey, here are the learnings from this. You know, feel free to roll this out with your science parks. Obviously, that's just one channel in, so to speak. But I think basically I would love to do a full-scale case study on what's happening in our respective clusters. I think that is something that will happen. It's something that will probably happen, you know, like on a Sunday evening when I've got some free time. But yeah, I think the Oxfordshire Greentech Network came around because of this sort of European funded program. And there is actually a great impact report about that program as a whole, and also about the Greentech Network and its legacy to date. So that is information that is readily available and shareable. But I think there does need to be more done, essentially, to characterise, okay, well, what is it about Oxfordshire that makes this such a strong and powerful ecosystem? And is it readily translatable elsewhere? Is it just that the sort of the nascent parts exist elsewhere and they just need to be coordinated and knitted together? Or is it that there's something fundamentally, you know, that could be added to an ecosystem, like in Manchester or Liverpool or the other places that we've mentioned before, which could really help sort of kickstart that specifically climate tech ecosystem? Because obviously there's lots of work around sustainability ecosystems in general, but climate tech, I think, is a bit of a different beast, and it requires a bit more of a concerted effort and thinking about how does the innovation ecosystem work together, especially when you're engaging with maybe university ecosystems that themselves might be quite difficult to attack because they have various angles, various schools, various you know, heads of department who maybe, like, if in the case of Oxford University, it's so large that you know, sometimes if one hand doesn't know what the other is doing, which is absolutely no diss on Oxford Uni. I'm sure it's the case for many
large
universities.
Organizations.
Large organizations in general, exactly. So Yeah.
So one of the things that has sort of changed this week, we've obviously had the good news that the UK is rejoining Horizon, which is obviously travesty we left, but we're rejoining, which is good. But then touching back on both talent and money and the ecosystems generally, we've obviously seen the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act in the US and the response from the EU with Green Deal Industrial Plan, which is in its workings, but is coming through. The UK still seems quite disjointed in all of that. And we're seeing certainly there is a company and a talent drain that's following some of those things, particularly to the US at the moment. How are you, without drawing you too politically, how are you seeing the UK situation and sort of combating some of these issues to make sure we do keep some of the innovation and we do get to create some of these companies and they don't disappear chasing the money to other locations where it might be easier to access funding or easier to get the support that you need to scale?
I think in Oxfordshire there is definitely a sort of strategic awareness that there's sort of land-based constraints, there's planning constraints, but people are trying to work through that a little bit. I mean, there's a lot of development that's happening in the north of Oxford. I think that's going to be a new sort of science region or district. Harwell Science and Innovation Campus, one of the largest in Europe, is expanding quite significantly over the next few years. I forget the exact figures, so sorry if anyone is listening and is going to shoot me after this, but I think it's probably going to expand from something like 8,000 people on site to 15,000 in the next few years.
Right.
And so that sort of drive for bringing in new companies, allowing existing companies to expand their operations, hopefully that will help in sort of anchoring people down a little bit. And I know that there's also been very recently, I think just this morning, there's been the announcement that that sort of a Qatari national fund might be interested in sort of investing £4 billion or $4 billion worth into climate tech innovation in sort of London, Oxford or Cambridge. So sort of looking at that region and specifically looking to create a site. So it's not just sort of from afar investing in isolated companies, but rather a physical location, I think, for the development of clean energy and for climate tech research and innovation in companies. So that's strong buying signals, I think, from outside, which sort of says to us, actually, yes, we do have something really good here. There are definitely constraints still that exist. I mean, we were speaking earlier about Oxford PV, which is obviously perovskite solar PV company, have done very well for themselves, but are now moving their manufacturing facility to Germany because of the constraints that they perceive to exist in Oxfordshire. So it's clearly not without its faults, and there's definitely room for
things
improvement.
To do. Yeah. Touching back a little bit on the some of the challenges again, where we live in this bubble, we see so many awesome technologies, we meet so many great founders and sort of genuine impact investors and all the people in our ecosystem that give us such hope and make the job enjoyable, right? But then sometimes we're forced to look outside of the window and the picture's not always one that's easy. And I talk often to the founders on the podcast around the dark days, because we all have them, whether, when you think actually my company's got 2 weeks to live or 2 months to live, and these things happen to most and all of us. How do you personally cope with or how do you keep motivated when sometimes the challenges and the dark days sort of the clouds get a bit black, shall we say? I mean, how do you personally deal with that? Because you've got a small team around you, but not a huge one. So how do you yourself keep motivated and at the coal face? There's got to be a better phrase than that, by the way. But at the coal face, so to speak.
At the solar panel face.
The electron face. It's
it's like the phrase. Now we're really cooking on gas. No, we don't want that either. But I think there's a range of answers to this, some more truthful than others, because I could really lean into the whole I meditate 4 times a day, and I sadly don't do that. I think I probably should. I think overall it's the positive stories that I try to hold on to most. Thankfully, I'm surrounded by those. Honestly, I think if I wasn't working in the place that I'm working, in Oxfordshire in particular, I think I would find it very difficult. just because I'm surrounded all the time by not just businesses that are doing the right thing, but also local authorities who, even with budgetary restraints, are still trying to do the right thing and are coming up with new initiatives and great public-private partnerships. Some of them even, European leading projects like the Energy Super Hub in Oxford, which is the largest EV charging hub of its kind in Europe. So there are things like that where I'm like, there is stuff happening, and we are really trying hard. I think also, though, sometimes, and I say this with a lot of privilege, not having kids or a mortgage, is sport. For me, it's sport. I play ultimate frisbee, and it gives me that sort of work-life balance that I need. Even though sometimes at those trainings, someone will come up to me and be like, Hannah, have you seen the news about this? Or like, Hannah, what do you think about this? And I'm like, I don't actually want to talk about this right
I'm here to not talk about
exactly.
that.
I'm solely here to sweat. But yeah, I mean, I guess that's not an option that's available to everyone, though. And I fully understand that people's schedules are extremely busy. So anything, going on walks, I'm so lucky to live quite close to a river and to some greenery. And I think there's a lot of sort of psychological evidence to show that being outside is hugely good for us. Looking at green things, there's something in our brain that's like, we like that. That's calming. And I've had many a lunchtime 20-minute power walk when, things have been going very much wrong at work and I'm feeling very anxious and just wondering how I'm going to dig myself out of X hole or whatever, where I've gone outside and I've let the feet hit the pavement and just looked at some flowing water as well. And it's just really helped. And again, privileged to say that, I used to live in a flat during COVID, and we didn't have access to green space during that time, or like anywhere that we could sit in private. And that was tough. And so I really feel for people who maybe don't have access to nature, but it's really important for our mental health.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's one of the unique, but a theme that comes across from most of the founders is that ability somehow, whatever the method is, and often it's sport, quite often it's walking, and certainly the forest bathing thing is really really important. But it's good to share and see that there's some of those ways that you can disconnect, because we're so engaged all the time, right? As a society, but even more so within Cleantech, I think there's always stuff going on. It's important to disconnect. But thank you for just sharing the time. I hope I'm not going to put too much work on your shoulders. Additionally, by suggesting that people want to find out more about the great work that you're doing, they can find out obviously from the websites, and we'll make sure there's links to websites for Oxfordshire and Cambridge Cleantech organisations, and also the Supercluster, because they've all got websites so people can learn more, and your details. So please don't inundate, but if there are ways that you can support other universities, clusters, organisations, I think it's so important that we just say all things and everything all at once, right? To get these things done. So thank you for the work that you're doing. Thanks for sharing some of that with us here, there, and as I say, we'll disseminate some of your information that hopefully people can learn from and can continue their good work in their universities and their ecosystems. But great. Thank you for joining the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been great.